Good day. Welcome back to the Wild Globalization Project. We're still talking about capital and capitalism. In part one, we looked at the conditions of capital value, management of raw resources, work and the organization of labor, and finally, knowledge-based innovation. Capital, however, as most of us think about it, is really about money. Lots of money, banks, investment bankers. Money means power, power to build, power to control, power to govern, power to exploit. Recall in Wild Money, we explored money as the, quote, unit of value, medium of exchange, store of value, and we added one, the instrument of sovereignty. The first three delineate small money, money to run the economy, everyday grocery store money. Sovereign money, and here big capital, were something different, harder to get our brains around. That is, money and value in the billions and trillions. The power of both small and big money emerges from two hyperhuman powers. First, we believe in money. Humans hold and move value in, quote, belief systems. When we all accept that a piece of paper, a dollar, or a digital currency can hold or represent the value of things. Balaji Srinivasan of Coinbase describes this, quote, belief system. If you take 10,000 people and they close their eyes hard and say, let this plane fly, it's not going to fly. But if they close their eyes hard and say, let this thing have value, and they all value it, they've suddenly got a price for it. They will exchange things of economic value among themselves, and the external world can interact with them. So belief is actually something you can now materialize into currency, unquote. Secondly, when we believe it, we let money transvalue the hard physical world into a new, exchangeable, tradable, and hyper-real playing field. That is the, quote, market. Whether your neighborhood grocery store or the global stock, bond, and capital markets. The whole show, the whole matrix of markets, small and big money, really boils down to what is value? What's something worth? By placing value on things, quote, stuff, we transform and transvalue potato chips or hamburgers or smartphones or cars into hundreds or thousands of dollars, smartphone companies into billions, or economies into trillions of dollars or cents or euros or etc. Humans live and breathe in this virtual belief system. Metaphysical time and space in Marx's, quote, mystery of the value forms, which he chased through Das Kapital's 800 pages, only to realize that, quote, value couldn't really be pinned down. Value is hard to pin down for at least two reasons. First, value is whipped incessantly in this wild quantum entanglement of ecology, demographics, tech, economy, governance, wealth. A gallon of gas gyrates with domestic and global politics, example of governance, or basics, quote, supply and demand, the economy. A dozen eggs gets hit with, quote, highly pathogenic avian influenza, or the bird flu, ecology, and prices go through the roof. It's wild value. But the second reason is even wilder. The value of coal, oil, nat gas, nuclear, solar, and wind isn't just the sheer power we access when we turn on the light or gas up or plug in our cars. Value, especially capital value, is not touchable, it's not physical, it's metaphysical, because it emerges from our cleverness, our innate curiosity, and our ability to encounter a need, a problem, and then set out to discover and use, quote, stuff to direct life, to, quote, run things. Hominids, our deepest cousins, started playing with fire and cooking food, and therefore improving our nutritional and metabolic efficiencies over 1 million years ago. And we've been growing brains and having babies and playing the, quote, human value, creativity, destructivity, or capital value game ever since. All the energy stuff, oil and gas, uranium, even wind and sunlight, that is, wild ecology's energy orders, were there for those billions of years until we came along and dreamed up how to use them. Value emerges. It's whipped by the wild quantum game until our wilder imaginations and knowledge powers discover and exploit it. So what is human value creativity? Evolution, emergence, and the ethical imperative. Whatever we name it, big money, capital, capitalism, civilization, globalization, or even, as we just ventured, human value creativity and destructivity. Humans have upped the ante on the zero-sum and the non-zero-sum games. We've opened the playing field and rules from mere long physical evolution, 1,000 or million-year game changes, so that now we rock and roll with sudden overnight game changers. That is, we're playing a metaphysical emergence game. For example, World War II, horrific industrial-scale warfare, but then two imagination, innovation, atomic bombs ended. But then what? Or the 1960s and 70s Asian famine. The Green Revolution ends it. But then what? Or the 1970s and 80s United States natural gas crisis. Fracking ends it. But then what? We'll get to the then what question in a moment. First, let's notice how value, creative, destructive responses are a force of nature which humans have taken to new and hypernatural levels. Recall how Seth Lloyd pointed out that by the time our primal cousins appeared 250,000 to 500,000 years ago, physical life on Earth had already achieved this metaphysical nature in the form of information processing deoxyribonucleic acid, or what's called DNA. The dinosaurs had DNA. Ants and honeybees have DNA. However, DNA's serpentine secret is that the component nucleic acids, adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, merely carry the code, the information. The code itself lives in the connectivities and the nucleotides themselves, in their combinations and recombinations that then direct the physical world's life forms. Consequently, the physical world's rules cannot fully account for the code's hyperphysical functionality. So no one has actually seen or touched information, whether in nature's DNA codes or the digitized data in your laptop or smartphones, or your brain. Sure, we understand how DNA's nucleic components combine and recombine, but the primary information remains elusive. Or we can monitor the brain's synapses, but the information, the code, whether the velociraptor, the orca, the honeybee, or the human, remains elusive except for its secondary effects. The orca's cry, the bee's honey, or the human's E equals mc squared, energy equals mc squared. The code itself is wild, except for their sketches or calculations or their smiles or hands or stone creations. No one has seen or touched the information or imagination or knowledge that built Notre Dame or the Taj, or that sculpted Michelangelo's Pietà. Information processing and knowledge responses abound in nature. Ant colonies or bees manage resources and perform intricate labor tasks. Dolphins and orcas live and communicate audibly in social pods. Elephants form family groups and appear to mourn their dead. But no other earth creatures transform the hard physical world of atoms and molecules and energy and stuff into the equation energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, which is virtuality, into what we're calling information, imagination, knowledge value. No other creatures are deploying virtualization to build high capital, value artificial intelligence supercomputers or rockets to Mars. No other creatures fight over geopolitical or money or government budgets or moral, ethical, religious values. Humans simply play the game differently at a virtual, highly complex, and language-bound level, a far more powerful, creative, yet more volatile and contentious, and therefore dangerous level. Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus were really scary dudes, but they didn't dream up nuclear weapons. Information, embodied and energized by the human imagination and knowledge, directs the physical world and thus achieves a hyperphysical functionality. This knowledge condition, the logos of the ancients, constitutes an emergent boundary condition that can't be explained nor accounted for with physical paradigms and rules alone. So capitalism and capital live and thrive in this emergent world. Our ideas, tech, strategies driven human emergence world embodies a new, quote, order of evolution, which in turn demands a new and expanded logic, a human value, creative destructivity logic, a quicker, accelerated logic that attempts to anticipate and, quote, own the full set of consequences, or what we call those dangling, quote, positive and negative externalities. For example, it took 30 years, from 1973 to 1992, to develop the smartphone, about one generation in anthropological time, and suddenly we talk to or even see the 8 billion people. We can tap vast encyclopedic resources, science, history, music, and art. At the same time, it takes just a few finger touches for our kids to get lost in its social media. But both realities live in the logic of the creative destructive event. Or recall that the smartphone and most rechargeable devices are powered by the amazing lithium-ion battery developed over that same 20 to 30-year period. Yet those batteries use cobalt that's most often mined by Congolese artisanal or really slave cash miners. If we moderns are so sophisticated, so smart, how did we come up so short-brained and short-hearted? How did we miss the consequences, the externalities of cobalt sourcing when we conjured up these new devices like the lithium-ion battery? So we're back to the, quote, then what question above. Then what logic emerges from the quantumly entangled matrix? Wild ecology, demographics, tech, economy, governance, wealth, learning, to remind. That human life plays in and that plays us. Then what questions force us to consider how our more or less unrestrained, creative, destructive powers can instantaneously shock reality and status quos. Then what logic reveals the boundary condition when our jet-powered and very cool devices break sound barriers? And what might the speed of light boom break? Then what questions blindside the capital value wilderness? Ask Robert Oppenheimer, who after the Manhattan Project's creative destructive success lived out his days bushwhacking and getting slapped around by then what logic. Same thing when we pick up our smartphones. We're touching the artisanal miner who dug the cobalt, or the Uyghur and Turkic Chinese Muslims who may have assembled it. And you thought capital and capitalism were just about small money and big money, quote, capitalists. We're all playing this human capital value, creativity, destructivity game. We're all players and users, winners and losers of wild value. We've all emerged from this universal drama of creation and destruction. It's been a wild living for 1 million years, and it's only getting wilder. The human imagination and knowledge-based value response emerged from given universal preconditions, Faith traditions claim this emergence is, quote, divine. Others leave it to chance. Either way, we have to wonder if accounts like the Tree of Knowledge, Genesis story, aren't onto something. How do we talk about the, quote, origin or logos of the universe, or Marx's mysterious value forms, without this emergent metaphysical force of information and knowledge that pervades evolutionary footprints since the Big Bang? A knowledge power that in the hands of humans can achieve both good and evil. So we have to ask ourselves if these hyper-powerful creativities work not just for now, but really for the future. Are they, quote, paying and playing the game forward for our kids and their kids and the future of the planet? Pay it forward is a present and a future logic. It forces our creativities to get down and real and practical with our decisions, and then to constantly rework, rethink our work. Include cobalt sourcing and the kids and mothers and all the artisanal miners who dig it up. Make real choices. Complete the logic. Of course, the logic is human and fallible, so it's always a work in progress. It's always trying to catch up with the new stuff, new texts, that often change or even set up new rules, new games, new boundaries. As we'll see, the human creative destructive response transvalues the world and even what it means to be human. It can metamorphose value itself. How are our kids doing with social media, or adults with nuclear weapons or dirty bombs you can build off the internet? Humans have been creating values since we first emerged on the African savanna. This modern, quote, capital version is bigger and more technologically powerful, but it's connected at the hip with all the players who made us possible, those amazing cousins who engineered our trek through 100,000-year ice ages or volcanic winters to get us from there to here. Once we open our imaginations to capital and capitalism as the long trek of human creativity, we begin to live and perceive capitalism in the context of the entire Homo sapien age, what anthropologists call the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene isn't just the recent amazing 250-year techno-industrial explosion of human populations, or even the 10,000 years since agriculture appeared. The Anthropocene has been 1,000,000 years in the making, beginning on that African savanna when our outlying hominid cousins first exploited fire and cooked their food, a game and rule-changing innovation that triggered more efficient metabolisms and our high-energy, outsized, quote, sapient brains. The Anthropocene emerged from the wild. Yet rather than taming this quantumly entangled wilderness with our techs and elegant strategies, haven't we only made it wilder? We first picked up stones and made tools. Now we pick up stones and make nuclear weapons. Yet by imagining capital and capitalism, or globalizing civilization, as the present emergence of the human value, creativity, destructivity response, might we better grasp how we are living an original, universal human drama by placing its amazingly creative, modern medicine, Apollo on the moon, yet at the same time terribly evil and destructive, the 20th century's world wars and holocausts, for example. By placing those acts into the full and swarming history of a universal story, an Anthropocene time, can we first gain a deeper and more humble sense of what it means to be this wild, virtually unrestrained human? Would it help us make better, more critical decisions, to better anticipate the bounties and risks of new ideas and strategies and techs? The wild globalization Anthropocene response is a compassionate and incisive call to critical thinking and pragmatic decision-making. It's a response to our virtually unrestrained imaginations and our hypernatural will to power to do both good or evil. So what is the human value creative destructive response? We've been tracking these responses all along. Cooperation, innovation, entrepreneurship and markets, excess production, reserving, agriculture, urbanization, debt, virtual capital, private property, scale, and the practical ethical imperative. To rethink capital and capitalism, we can first observe how human zero-sum and non-zero-sum knowledge value creativities are responses to the playing field's given orders. In a high-risk, high-competition world, first with saber-toothed tigers and now our 8 billion to feed, how do humans dream up and then deploy the energy equals mass times the speed of light squared intelligibilities to respond to and then direct their natural order? As Beth Shapiro observed earlier, how or why do humans create kale from wild cabbage or Boston Terriers from wolves? Or, as a wild globalization inquiry adds, atom bombs from dirt? So we'll go through now the various stages of capital value creation. Cooperation, from working together to super wealth. Capital and capitalism emerge from human cooperation. Cooperation is found in virtually every advanced life form, from microbes to ants to elephants, even to capitalists. Quote, cooperation is everywhere. Plants provide each other nutrients, fish remove parasites from each other's scales, ants build nests together, predators hunt in packs, and bees will even give up their own life for the benefit of the hive, unquote. We noticed how humans first teamed with wild wolves some 15,000 years ago, and would then advance cooperation into longer-term planning and government strategies as they deployed agriculture and settled in larger urban centers. By the 20th century, 400,000 NASA engineers landed 2 guys on the moon. Cooperation creates synergistic, non-zero-sum, quote, value. Smartphones are cooperatively satellited and GPSed because we learned how to go into space together. Cooperation is both a zero-sum, that is, let's work together, strategy, but it's a core non-zero-sum logic as well. Instead of just chasing rabbits together, I make a new gadget, like a non-zero-sum bow and arrow, or atlatl, to better feed my family. Or maybe I make a smartphone then to keep track of them. And if it's up to Steve Jobs' smartphone, then everyone on the planet gets connected, cooperated. Bezos might create a, quote, marketplace where you can buy it with a Jobs mouse click, and then whoosh, everyone's off to the 21st century's latest human race. But then also, whoosh, our kids get lost in social media. So the 21st century is now a hyper-connected, hyper-integrated, globalized bazaar where billions of consumers wait, ready to cooperate and buy stuff. And if your stuff is good, then Jobs or Bezos might become million or billionaires overnight. The world's first trillionaire may already be walking the planet. It's one thing to build a Microsoft, an Amazon or Apple or a Starlink for your family or your clan or your hometown. It's quite another when it reaches the 8 billion people on the planet. Modern human value creativity can trigger flash wealth asymmetries and income inequalities that become flashpoints for rancorous resentment, envy, and even violent geopolitical conflict. So how prepared are, quote, modern globalizing humans, just 400 generations removed from hunter-gatherer small group psychologies, how prepared are we to cope with national markets of millions of people or global markets of billions of people? Carnegie's steel, Rockefeller's oil, Morgan's finance built early 20th century infrastructures and gained asymmetrical wealth. Jobs' smartphone, Bezos' Amazon, Page's and Brin's Google configure the cooperating soul of our century. Musk's Starlink is even reshaping the modern battlefield in Ukraine. Cooperation is a natural evolutionary strategy which human emergence has exploded and scaled to hypernatural and seemingly unrestrained possibilities. Next, we can talk about excess production and reserves to then prosperity. Excess production and reserving is everywhere in the natural world. Bees store honey, squirrels squirrel away nuts. Humans, however, do something else. They think and plan, they adapt, often quickly, as risks and circumstances change. Wild ecology, earth warming, under the current climate optimum, changed human adaptation strategies. People could begin to grow, plan, and then trade food resources. Food was, quite simply, the earliest form of, quote, capital. People, however, have always wanted and strived for more than just survival. In wild culture, we talked about the unrestrained desire to know. And observing the 20th century's world wars, we added the unrestrained desire for power. We can add another here, the unrestrained desire to prosper, to make and buy and have stuff, lots of stuff. Clever tinkerers, inventors, and entrepreneurs constantly entice and hook consumers with more and more non-zero-sum stuff. Economists dryly call this consumer demand. Who or what actually won the 20th century's Cold War, we can ask. Was it the $26 trillion in 2025 dollars adjusted for inflation that we spent on guns and rockets? Or was it because freer markets made better and lots more stuff? BMWs, Benzes, Toyotas, Fords, Chevys. By 1970, the U.S.'s 200 million consumers were driving 20 times as many passenger cars as the USSR's 240 million consumers. The Apple and the iPhone didn't happen in Moscow or Beijing, but in Jobs' garage, or with Bezos selling books. The West won the Cold War because its freer and wilder and hotter innovators, its producers and consumers, won the excess production and prosperity war. Next, let's talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, markets. Innovation to entrepreneurships to markets is how the unrestrained desire for value creation responds with non-zero-sum techs and strategies. Wild human innovation dreams up clever devices and strategies from wild nature, from using fire for protection and cooking food and brains to fabricating atom bombs made from the naturally occurring uranium-235 fissile isotopes. Innovation emerges from, quote, outside-the-box thinking power, what we'll explore later as wild learning. It's Edison's 10,000 laboratory failures, or Jobs' or Wozniak's garage imaginations, or Musk sleeping on Tesla factory floors that dream and wrestle up the capital values of the light bulb, the PC, or the EV. Innovation lives and constantly changes human conditions and circumstances. Most of us have moved to cities, and we're having fewer kids because we've industrialized agriculture, for better and worse. And in just a couple of generations, birth control has transformed human demographics and the rules of sex. Innovation needs entrepreneurs to get the gadgets out to the people. Recall how the Chinese cleverly invented printing, gunpowder, and navigation. But it was the scrappy, enterprising Northern Europeans who got Bibles and newspapers out to the folks. And it was their cannons and compasses in the hands of enterprising sailors that dominated the seas and landed the scientific industrial revolution in the Americas. Markets of freer producers and consumers test and confirm and reward the value of stuff. Would you rather drive a BMW or Tesla or a Yugo? Still, innovation routinely wreaks havoc with the quality of human and natural life. Innovation simply creates and destroys value. Imagine 8 billion cars on the road. So innovation and market distributions are curious and serendipitous and wild phenomena. We play in them, but they also play us. Consider Bart, the grizzly bear. In the movie The Edge, Charles Morse, played by Anthony Hopkins, gets lost in the Alaskan wilderness and survives a grizzly bear attack by impaling it on a spear. It's Hollywood after all. Astonishingly, the bear was a living and breathing grizz named Bart, trained into stardom by innovators Doug and Lynn Seuss. In real life, Bart never harmed a soul. Bart later made his own movie, The Bear, that grossed over $100 million in box office capital. So is Bart just another innovating, greedy capitalist? So let's talk about agriculture, urbanization, and civilization. Agriculture came along under the current sun-triggered Milankovitch cycle climate optimum. Urban centers appeared as early as Jericho in 9600 BCE and began to change, really to transvalue human and earth life. Ag and cities appeared over 150 to 200 generations, or 3,000 to 4,000 years, and together represent the two most dramatic and dynamic lifestyle-changing momentums of what we call our modern, quote, civilization. Ag and cities transformed the capital value and reserve game. Excess food stores became one of the earliest forms of capital. Whoever controlled food production and excess food resources became the capital, quote, power brokers. These urban centers also became the most logical hubs for trading reserve goods. By the latter stages of the first agricultural revolution, about 4,000 to 3,500 BCE, or before the Common Era, cities had become power centers for expanded state governance and military power, as well as trade and human culture. Capitalism, the market system that values and moves the excess human creative reserves through complex social economic orders, and capital, the excess reserves of value, expanded and intensified under the emergence of agriculture and urbanization. Civilization emerges from the entanglement of factors and now lives in our modern human value strategies and systems. That is, production or economy, management or governance, culture, which is civil law and ethics, science, faith traditions, and the arts. And finally, wealth. Let's talk about debt, the leverage of value. Urban living required larger, more reliable, and so more complex food reserve management. Ancient governments, palace priests, and wealthy individuals in the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Asia gradually concentrated control over both land and excess grain reserves. Food supplies could be increased by lending out excess grain reserves or seed grain to aspiring farmers. Agricultural production was, quote, leveraged, multiplied with the appearance of debt lending, which also increased the power of governance itself. Market players use the term seed capital today. Egyptian hieroglyphics and Mesopotamian cuneiform confirmed that, quote, credit systems actually preceded coinage or money by 3,000 years, unquote. Debt lending, however, also casts a shadowy history. Aspiring borrowers would put up, quote, promise to pay collateral. So, for example, hard resources like land, but also the risk of indenture or enslavement if crops failed and the debt went unpaid. Chattel slavery persists today, as global human trafficking is estimated at around $30 billion a year. Debt is the wildest and most dynamic quantitative story of the 21st century global economy, totaling over $300 trillion, roughly 3 times the productive economy. Governments carry $100 trillion of that debt. Even the Statue of Liberty, the welcoming lady and symbol of global capital, stands in New York City Harbor today because Joseph Pulitzer secured $100,000 of crowdfunding to beat out Baltimore, Boston, San Francisco, and Philadelphia. The wild virtual capital value response. As we tracked in Wild Money, humans play this hard drive zero-sum physical resources game with our information, imagination, knowledge-powered, soft-wired virtual value game. This virtualized world has come to life over the Anthropocene's full trace, a million years of hominid and Homo sapien history. It runs through every virtual, language-bound artery and vein of capital and capitalism. We've played it on stone tablets, paper, and now digitized computer screens. Its numbers light up our digital lives, but its value is really, quote, out there, on the street. And it can dynamically mobilize, yet also violently rock and rankle global civilization. Can you say the 2007 to 2009 great financial crisis? Recall that virtually anything of value can be moneyfied, capitalized, or to use finance's term, securitized. Essentially all ag products, corn, cotton, pork bellies, into commodity futures, but then also student loans, auto loans, credit card receivables, and as the crisis revealed, mom and pop mortgages into mortgage bonds, credit default swaps, and even wilder derivatives of derivatives. The financial world is awash in dazzling, digitized trading schemes that move and, quote, float trillions on vast oceans of virtual value markets, every minute of every day and night. Securities, we say. How secure was the financial crisis anyway? So here we're returning to the question of whether, as we get kicked around by history's great crises, wars, depressions, fought over markets or oil or power, are we playing the game, or is the game also playing us? Are we back on M.C. Escher's staircases? The physical world's quantum entanglements, from its gyrating climates, volcanoes, solar mass ejections, to our 8 billion global players, to all the corn or wheat bushels or oil barrels, even our clever and touchable inventions and innovations, the entanglement remains captured in this wild and fiercely high-risk, high-competition game. We've taken the zero-sum natural risk competition game, virtualized it, and transformed it into an entirely new and higher risk and thus transvalued life world. We play it and it plays us on a constantly emerging, rules-changing, value creation, destruction, and multidimensional chessboard. We've arrived at a new, if still earthbound, wildness. Marx's value forms remain mysterious for him because the economic physics he pursued was always incessantly being transvalued to this virtualized game that defies and compromises physical quantification. Just when we think we've pinned down the value of a product or strategy, markets trade, an innovator creates a new and destroys an old product, or automation and now AI transvalue production and labor, and we're left swirling in the incessant transvaluation of value. Consequently, information, knowledge, imagination, virtualized value is wildly more powerful. We're still trying to catch up with and imagine how wild it is, and it's only getting wilder. This Wild Capital Part 2 YouTube is one of a suite of the Wild Globalization YouTubes. Visit our substack.wildglobalization.com for transcripts, or our website at wildglobalization.com, and watch for our book out in 2026. Thank you.